Do you believe in miracles? That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Look at surveys and polls over recent months, over recent years, and it seems like Americans, by and large, depending on which poll you look at, do believe in miracles. But the number of miracle-believing Americans has dwindled in line with the number of Bible-believing Americans and God-believing Americans and the dwindling that's taken place there. So, do you believe in miracles? And how do you classify a miracle, right? That's sort of key, because I look at the growth of a tree and I see a miracle. But some people just consider that nature and they don't consider God's hands in it. And they only define a miracle as something that is above and beyond what human science can explain. So either way, do you believe in miracles? Before I get into more of that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at washingtontimes.com, and of course, wherever podcasts are available. And I want to just quickly mention, if you do go to washingtontimes.com to get Bold and Blunt, sign up for my 3 times a week newsletter. It's called Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley. You'll get my commentaries that I write every day at the Washington Times, as well as my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcast, along with whatever Bold and Blunt videos I do that week. I also want to quickly mention, I have a new book out. It's called God Given or Bust: Defeating Marxism and Saving America with Biblical Truths. Would love it if you pick up a copy of that. And if you do pick up a copy, or you have a copy and you're reading it or have finished reading it, go to Amazon and please give a review to it. Love reading the reviews, good or bad. I'm just more interested in truthful feedback. Love to get that. Let me read you this from a Pew Research updated survey. It came out February 2025, the executive summary of the 2023-2024 Pew Research Center's Religious Landscape Study. And I love going to Pew because they do such an in-depth look at issues that are important to Americans, right? They don't just take a quick glance at things. They do a deep dive, and most of their surveys take months and months of data gathering, and then they put that all together in this really great data geek type of report. So go to Pew Research, support Pew Research, right? But for the purposes of today, let me just read you this, okay? 62% of U.S. adults describe themselves as Christians. And then Pew helpfully goes on to break down the definition of Christians, or the denomination of Christianity. 40% are Protestant, 19% are Catholic, and 3% are other Christians. 29% are religiously unaffiliated. And the breakdown there is 5% are atheist, 6% are agnostic, and 19% identify religiously as, quote, nothing in particular, end quote. And one other quick stat from this Pew survey: 7% belong to religions other than Christianity. The breakdown there: 2% are Jewish and 1% each are Muslim, Buddhist, or Hindu. Some key measures of religious belief and practice also have held fairly steady in recent years, Pew reported. The 2023-2024 Religious Landscape Study finds that 44% of U.S. adults say they pray at least once a day, though down significantly since 2007. This measure has held between 44% and 46% since 2021. 33% say they go to religious services at least once a month, Pew finds. And then one more stat from Pew: large majorities of Americans have a spiritual, supernatural outlook. For example, 80% believe people have a soul or spirit in addition to their physical body. 83% believe in God or a universal spirit. 79% believe there is something spiritual beyond the natural world, and 70% believe in heaven, hell, or both. This all plays into Americans' belief in miracles or non-belief in miracles, right? Because if you believe in miracles, things that cannot be explained in the materialistic world, things that must have come from something unseen, from a greater force, an even undefined force, things that must have come from God or a creator, then that goes hand in hand with the stats on Americans' belief in God, right? It's particularly the one that Pew found, that 79% believe there is something spiritual beyond the natural world. So to flush that out a little bit, Colson Center put out this interesting report in January called, get this, The Rising Belief in Miracles. And I'm going to read a little bit from this because it really is very interesting. January, like I said, colsoncenter.org put this out. Author John Stonestreet and Shane Morris. According to a recent report from statistician, that's a mouthful, right, Ryan Burge, the belief in miracles has risen in recent years among the college-educated, the group most correlated with materialistic beliefs. So that's very interesting, right? Because the dawn of science and the scientific awakening type of periods that have taken place in America usually go hand in hand with a fall-off of belief in God or belief that God has a hand in the day-to-day matters of his creation. So it's interesting, to me at least, that it's the college-educated who are actually seeing more miracles, looking beyond what they can see, smell, taste, touch, and hear in the earthly world for answers to what's going on. They're peeling back the curtain. They're looking at the spirit. So back to this, according to a recent report, yada, yada, in 1991, just 45% of Americans with a bachelor's degree said they, quote, definitely believe, end quote, in miracles. However, according to the U.S. government's General Social Survey, that number climbed to 63% in 2018. From 45% in 1991 to 63% in 2018. The change was even more dramatic among those with graduate level degrees. In 1991, a mere 30% of those with at least a master's degree believed in miracles. By 2018, that number had jumped to 61%. So more than doubled, right? The higher the education, it seems, trends showed, at least between 1991 and 2018, the higher the formal education, the higher the belief in miracles. Isn't that interesting? Because I think the more you know, the more you understand, the less you actually know, right? The more research you do in any given topic, the more you realize that you know very little in the end about that topic. It just opens up a whole new world of questions the more you dig deep into something. That goes for any topic, I think, but particularly when you're dealing with topic of cosmic proportions, when you look at space, when you look at matter, when you look at God. The more you think you know, the less you realize you really do know. And that's optimistic, right? That really is optimistic. Apparently, back to Colson Center, apparently education is no longer the de-supernaturalizing influence it once was. In fact, those with higher education are as likely to believe in miracles as those without higher education. However, these surprising numbers are part of the larger story of Western secular society. I'm going to read a little bit more because this is really interesting, at least to me. And if it's not to you, you can always fast forward, right? But if you're interested, listen up. The standard prediction about the West has been that the growth and expansion of technology would continue to make us more secular, and that more secular would mean less belief in God and the supernatural. But the percentage of atheists and agnostics in America has hardly budged, even among the group Burge, remember, he's the author, Ryan Burge, the author of The Statistician, right? But the percentage of atheists and agnostics in America has hardly budged, even among the group Burge refers to as the, quote, non-religious, end quote. Even the so-called Great De-Churching has not been a mass conversion to atheism, but rather an explosion of what sociologists call nones, people with no religion in particular. One more paragraph and then I'll get to my guest, my great guest, by the way. Making sense of this apparent contradiction requires a rethinking what it means to be secular. For example, just as rejecting religion is not the same as rejecting the supernatural, so an increased openness to the supernatural should not be equated with religious revival. That's very true, right? Because there are a lot of people out there that dabble in the occult because they believe in the supernatural, but they have very little to do with biblical truths and true godly principles and God himself, right? They're actually dabbling in the demonic, right? So just because there is a belief in supernatural does not automatically equate in belief in God, and therefore does not automatically equate in belief in godly miracles. Because Satan can do miracles too when it suits his purpose, or he can seem to do miracles. He can, he is the great deceiver, right? And in the end, it's going to be the great deceptions of Satan who are able to turn even believers in God toward him, right? He's going to fool people in the end. And some pastors out there, some very smart pastors and scholars, religious scholars, think Satan's going to actually tap into artificial intelligence and technology as part of his success at deceiving the masses. But that's a different discussion, different day. So going back to belief in the supernatural does not automatically lead to belief in godly miracles. At the same time, the idea that college educated, and the higher the college education goes, the greater the trend shows of belief in a supernatural world, that to me is optimistic because God can use that, right? You tap into a questioning mind, an open mind that otherwise would be a closed door to belief in God. You open that, you peel it back a little bit, and God can use that. He can use that and show himself, and the glory of God manifests already in nature. So, and as I said, that is miraculous itself, just God's creations, God's nature creations, that those with, whether you have higher degrees or no degrees at all, those seeking miracles and seeking answers to those miracles, God can use that questioning attitude to show himself in that person's life and to turn that questioning individual's heart toward him. So there can be a great awakening in God. Even those who look at the supernatural world, not yet through godly eyes, but at least through questioning eyes that recognize the existence of another life. Does that make sense? I hope I didn't go too much in rabbit holes down there. Anyhow, back to my guest today, or to introduce my guest today. His name is Billy Hallowell. He's been a guest on Bold and Blunt before. He is a professional colleague and really somebody whose work I admire deeply, deeply. And he has a new documentary out there investigating the supernatural miracles, where he actually took a deep dive journalistic look at cases of miraculous healings out there in the medical community where he actually visited these people. He visited with doctors. He pored over documents, medical documents, and he came to the conclusion, hey, these things really do happen. These things still really do exist. To go back to my first question on this segment of the Bold and Blunt podcast, do you believe in miracles? Which, if you caught the tone, then you know that I was mirroring Miracle on Ice, right? The great hockey movie. If you haven't seen it, you got to see that. So put on your checklist now. God-given or bust, got to get that. Subscribe to Bold and Blunt newsletter, got to do that. Got to see Billy Hallowell's new documentary, right? Investigating the supernatural miracles. And got to see Miracle on Ice, the Disney movie. All right, so that's 4 things, 4 takeaways at least. But anyhow, let me get to my guest, Billy Hallowell. I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. Always great to chat with you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I love getting to join you for this, so appreciate it.
Well, I can't wait to get into our topic today because you have this new film, this new video, documentary. Is it technically a documentary? Just tell people about it. It's so exciting.
It is. It has been really one of the most faith-building, transformational projects. I've been working on it since October of 2023, and it's called Investigating the Supernatural Miracles. And I'll just tell people they can go to cbn.com/supernatural, and that's where you can watch the film and order it. But this is a movie where we spent, really the last year and a half traveling the country, exploring very specific claims of miraculous healing. These are stories of brain tumors disappearing. They're stories of, just incredible stories. A man who was dead for 40 minutes who literally came back to life, which I know sounds crazy. But we took a journalistic perspective and went into these miracle stories and really unpacked them. And we picked stories that we felt were the strongest we had ever seen. And so, we were with the families, we were with doctors, we spent so much time pulling the information together. And so that's the basis of the film. And of course, dealing with the theology and the questions that, Christians and atheists have about miracles, why some people don't get them, why others do. And so that's the baseline of investigating the supernatural.
I was about to ask you about the specifics of the miracles, but you just raised an interesting point. Why do some people get miracles, some people don't?
Oh gosh, Cheryl, you are asking the biggest question of all. What of them, and I know that you and I have both been through these scenarios where you're praying for something and you're hoping for something and you're asking God and seeking, and it doesn't happen the way that we want it to. And I think we deal with that in the film. We actually have a doctor, Dr. Chauncey Crandall, who is incredibly very big in the miracle business today. He actually sees a lot of medical miracles. He prays over his patients and sees incredible things happen. But before he got into that ministry, he lost a son to leukemia and did everything he could, seeking God for a miracle. And over a 4-year period, did not get the healing on this side of eternity that he wanted for his son. And so, we have to deal with that because when tragedy hits, you're often faced with a decision. Are you going to be angry at God or are you going to lean into trust? And a lot of that decision and what we end up doing depends on where we are with our faith. And so the question of why does that happen? I often look at it like this. We're called, if we're people of faith, and not everybody is, if we're Christians, we're called to trust God no matter what. And to have this radical trust in him that we are telling him, God, do your will, but here is what we really want. We want this healing for ourselves, for our loved ones. And we pray that, and we believe that the healing is possible to the very end, while at the same time finding comfort in the fact that even if it's not on this side of eternity, that God has us in his will. And that is a challenging thing, to hold on to that trust at the same time that we're grappling and struggling for this thing. And so that doesn't 100% answer your question, but I think it points to the dynamic of where our posture needs to be on these things, because God knows best and he knows what needs to happen. And so there are times, I think, our journey here has ended. And for those who know the story of Lazarus, Jesus rose Lazarus from the dead. Well, Lazarus died again, right? At some point, the miracles run out at some point, even when they do happen.
Well, maybe you sort of answered that in your explanation, though, because, for instance, a doctor may not go into medicine if his or her son didn't die first, right? I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes the tragedies or the seeming failure of God to answer a miracle how we want it is actually something that propels something even greater for God's glory.
I love that, and I think that that is actually the case in Chauncey Crandall's story and that doctor's story, that he probably wouldn't be doing, as he was seeking to heal his son. And this really struck me. Look, his son was given a couple of weeks, I think, to live with leukemia, right? And he lived for 4 years, and so some would say there's a miracle even in that. Right, they got 4 years with their son. Now, I don't want to oversimplify that because this is difficult for people when these things happen. But he, to your point, would not have gone in to the ministry he's in, and he's a well-respected doctor and cardiologist and internist cardiologist, had he not gone on that journey to try to heal his son. And now he's watching these incredible things happen, and God's working through him, in especially in his ministry. Again, that wouldn't have happened. So I think the other thing I'll tell you too, Cheryl, that really kind of shook me a little bit and has stuck with me, and it's been kind of emotional, is just, as you're doing a project like this, you're thinking, all these people that we talk to. There was one man who we tell their story, and we, by the way, we do reenactments too. So there's a little bit of sort of dramatic in the middle of the real stories of showing what happened. He fell on the ice as a police officer and broke his neck and was paralyzed for 10 years in excruciating pain.
Ugh.
And all of these people, it took years to get healing. None of them had this instant healing that happened right away. They went to prayer meeting after prayer meeting, but all of their healings appeared to be, based on the evidence, miraculous. And so I think of that woman in Mark 5 who's so desperate for Jesus to heal her after the 12 years of suffering, and she's reaching out to him just to touch his clothes to get healed. And she gets her healing. But you think, what a journey, and what is God showing these people while they're on that journey? And so that was the case in each of these stories, and it added a compelling, element. But just to kind of put a bow on this, for me, it challenged me because I thought, before this film, would I have had the same perseverance to seek the healing no matter what, and do that even knowing I may not get the end? Or would I just throw the towel in and say, okay, I'm at the end and I'm going to give up now? And I fear that I probably would have been more likely to give up before working on this than I would be now.
That's an interesting discussion or an interesting theme right there, because in the Bible, when Jesus told the paralyzed man, "Take up your pallet and walk," he was laying in the pool with a whole bunch of other people who had been paralyzed or in various states of medical ailments for years, and he was the only one that actually wanted to be healed, if you read that Bible passage.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that is the thing, and I think there's a danger, and this is where we have to be so careful, because I think you can leave people feeling destitute when they really want that healing and they can't get it, and they start to feel like it's their fault. But to your point, I think it is. I mean, there's this one woman, and she's crying as she's saying this in the documentary. She's saying, we just did not stop. We just kept going and going and going. And I thought, that is what we are called. Like, that's true faith and true trust, to just keep going and pushing for that miracle and believing that it's possible. And you may not get it, but you're called to do that, I think. And I feel in our world today, too many of us, even in the church, are not willing to have that perseverance. And so,
Absolutely.
and maybe it's because we've been told that these miracles don't happen. I think a lot of Christians believe that the miracles have ceased.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I've heard that as well. And I don't quite understand that way of thinking as a Christian, that no miracles exist any longer. And honestly, if you just look at nature, that's a miracle right there, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that, because I've done so many interviews this week, and I've said, look at the flowers outside, the trees. I mean, the fact that we're having a conversation right now and we're conscious, these are all miracles we take for granted every day. And so I do think there are three different groups of people when it comes to investigating the supernatural, and the people who would benefit from this film. The Christians who already believe in miracles, they're going to have their faith built and sustained and corroborated. Those Christians who don't, or they're not sure, I think they're going to be really challenged, because you have to walk away and say, and this is the same for the atheists and the skeptics, not to compare those two groups, but they both have a skepticism towards miracles. what in the world is going on here that this man at a prayer event got out of his brace for his first time in 10 years and walked out of that event? I mean, what happened in that moment? And we actually have the moment on video in the documentary when this actually happened, because somebody recorded it on a cell phone. So these are important questions. But yes, I'm with you. I think it's insane almost to presume that no miracles happen today.
So let's talk about specific people that you interviewed, specific findings, because did you have any jaded moments that people said it was a miraculous healing or something like that, but you found it not to be true? And what were some of the remarkable findings?
Yeah, so I love that question. We were very, very, very specific. When we went to film, we knew already, we had put so much research into these cases that we were certain that we had at least a case that was inexplicable, that had elements that were very, we still went in and during our interviews tried to poke holes and find where there might be things that didn't make sense. But we certainly encountered a lot of that in the research and prep before we went out to film. And so, and here's the thing, I think most of us have miracle moments, things that have happened that we would say, we know the Holy Spirit told us, we felt, if we're Christians, we felt that it was a miracle. And it could be something really small. It might not be what we're talking about, these medical miracles. Those are hard to verify, right? But we know that they're true. And so I never want to diminish those things, but there are people who have made stories up. There are people who have conjured up these things. And so, we had a litmus test for what we wanted to look at, and the bar was very high on these stories. And so we kept the bar high. And so, but by the time we got in, we kind of knew. So I didn't have so much of that. But I will tell you, I did have, before going in, even though these were verifiable and we had the documentation, if somebody's telling me that a person died for 40 minutes and they've come back to life, I'm thinking, okay, all right, is this true, right? And so that particular story, which I am happy to break down, that one really shocked me and got me, especially when I'm sitting across from the man who was dead for 40 minutes interviewing him.
Wow. Yes. Please break it down a little bit more.
Okay. So his name is Jeff Markin. And it's interesting because the doctor I mentioned, Chauncey Crandall, whose son died of leukemia, he was in the hospital in the emergency room working. This is after his son's death. He gets a call that a man is in very bad shape. He had had a heart attack, and it's Jeff Markin. He goes to the room. They've been working on him for 40 minutes. He's dead. There's nothing they can do. He's had no oxygen for all this time. His heart has been stopped. They call his death. The doctor leaves the room, and as he's walking out in the hallway, he feels God say to him, go back and pray for that man. Now, he initially ignores it because it seems ridiculous, right? Like, I'm not going back into that room. The man's dead. He's on his way to the morgue, literally. Goes back in the room. He finally says, okay, God, you're going to prompt me again. I'm going to go. And he prays over this man. You can imagine the nurses and the medical professionals in the room are probably like, what in the world is going on? And so he's praying over this man. And I think the message that God gave him was sort of along the lines of, if that man is not saved, if he has not become a Christian, you need to go pray for him. So he says to one of the people in the room, shock him one more time. And they're looking at him like, you're out of your mind. If we shock him, he's going to be brain dead. Even if we got a heartbeat back, we tried to bring him back for 40 minutes. It didn't work. And he said, do it. They shock this man, and his heartbeat immediately comes back. Not only does his heartbeat immediately come back, the nurse says, what have you done? He's going to be brain dead. They bring him to ICU. 2 days later, he wakes up. And I interviewed him. He's completely fine. That story, because we have the medical documentation, is mesmerizing. I mean, it's a crazy story. And so there's a whole other part of it I won't get into that you'll see in the film about what that man experienced while he was essentially dead for 40 minutes. So there's just so much to these stories, and that's just one of them.
Wow. And you said you don't get into that in the film? I can understand.
We actually do.
You do.
We do
Okay.
get into it, and we actually get into what he experienced, Jeff Markin, during that time. And when he woke up, he was saying, I'm so disappointed. I'm so disappointed. And you'll see in the film why he was saying that, because of what he saw and experienced during that time.
Oh, wow. All right. So we'll leave that as a teaser. I won't ask you any more questions about that. And how, again, real quick, slide in, how can people see the film?
Yes, they can go to cbn.com/supernatural and you'll be able to get it right there and stream it. And it is, I would just encourage people, I think the conversations that will come from it, the director, and I just need to give him a shout out, Jared Anderson, phenomenal director. And we're actually going to be doing for the Washington Times a sit down interview, Jared and I, just talking to one another about the process of putting the film together. And that'll be coming at some point very soon. So.
Oh, well, dang it. I was about to ask you along those lines, how does one go about getting the stories for that? How did you start this process? How did you, maybe you can just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting. This project came out of nowhere. It came out of thin air, really. And I think it was because it was supposed to happen. And we started working on it and initially felt like this is a 3-part TV series. That's actually how this was greenlit. And it was going to be a 3-part, 30-minute TV series. The first was on miracles. The second was on heaven and hell. And the third was on angels and demons. And we started doing the miracles portion and filming it, and immediately Jared knew, the director, he said, this is a feature film. There's way too much here. We cannot tell this story in a half an hour. And so this has become a film series, hopefully. And this is just the first in that series that we will be doing on it. They'll all be investigating the supernatural, but they'll each hit on a different topic. And so the next topic is angels and demons, and we'll take the same approach, investigative approach to that, which is a harder topic in some ways to tackle. But we are actively working on that now. So yeah, getting the stories themselves, it was a lot, just like, like any good writer and researcher and journalist knows, it's diving in constantly to data and information and stories and vetting them. And so we spent a lot of time, a lot of phone calls. I mean, Jared's probably tired of me at this point. Every day, kind of going through what we think about these stories until we can really nail them down. So that, and I'll tell you, that was the really cool part, because a lot of times when you're working in media, it's very active. You're doing it in the moment. With this, we knew once we got to set every time exactly what we needed to collect and do, because we had put that research in on the front end.
Oh, wow. Billy, what a fascinating project. Wow. A little bit jealous here. This is such a great research project. Really, I can't wait to watch the film. One more time, go ahead and tell people how to get it.
Absolutely. It's cbn.com/supernatural.
Got it. All right. Billy Hallowell, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. And I look forward to your interview on Washington Times as well to learn more about the making of the film. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Investigating the supernatural. Check it out. Thank you for listening. I want to remind you, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, and of course, wherever podcasts are available. Tune in next time. In the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.